Welcome to Blue-Black Control for Scars Mirrored and Block Constructed. In fact, this is not the main deck as it's normally set up. I will load how it really is. Sorry about that. That was actually a sideboard setup, as I will show you in the daily videos that I took with this deck. So this deck is really interesting. I was complaining a few weeks ago about how I didn't like block. I still don't love block, but it's a lot nicer now that I found a blue deck to play, now that I can actually play my Consecrated Sphinxes, because I really love this guy. This guy's great. So this is actually a Tezzeret deck, but not really a Tezzeret deck at the same time. It only has 11 artifacts main deck. If you check his ability, look at the top 5 cards of your library, you should have 12 artifacts at least, minimum, in your deck to have hit his +1 ability on average. So we're actually going to miss quite a bit with this deck and Tezzeret's ability. The deck's not focused around Tezzeret. Tezzeret's just a option in the deck. He's there to haste up your artifacts. Sometimes you haste a Ratchet Bomb. Most of the time it's a Wellspring, and turn them into 5/5 either blockers or attackers. Just depends on the matchup. Turns your Inkmoth Nexuses 3 of into 5/5 infect attackers or just 5/5 creatures. So he's really important to the strategy, but he's not the focus of the deck. It's not a Tezzeret deck. It's a deck that uses Tezzeret, I like to say. One of the main strategies, one of the main supports of this deck is the 8 Wellsprings. They're very important. They're a card advantage. This is Armillary Sphere on the deck, and this is Divination. As far as usually at least, Tezzeret can turn them into creatures, they die, you'll get the effect, or you can Phyrexia's Core them away. I'd like to not Phyrexia's Core away the Mycosynth Wellsprings unless I need them, just so I have more fodder for Tezzeret when he comes down. But sometimes I have to, just depends if you need a lance or not. Steel Sabotage is great in block. It's worth saying that block is full of artifacts, because this is an artifact block. At the same time, there are a lot of creatures that you need to kill. Pure Steel Paladin, Hero Blade Hold with Go for the Throat, so that is important. And the most important removal spell in block is Dismember. The only creature that does not kill really of note is Consecrated Sphinx. I mean, it doesn't kill Sheoldred either, but she's not seeing any play right now. Just fantastic. Stoker Battle there is a concession to the fact that Blue-Black Control is actually one of the 3 tier 1 archetypes right now. This card is horrible against all the white decks, so that's important to note. Tezzeret, as we talked about, is a way to... He's essentially a 5/5 haste creature. He's essentially just an artifact creature machine, essentially. He's not the purpose of the deck, but the deck uses him very well. And sometimes you just start looking for artifacts if you have nothing else to do. But mostly he's there to turn your guys into creatures. Consecrated Sphinx, as we discussed, is amazing. Just pure card advantage from this guy. I love how one arm is desiccated and the other one is buff, so that's a great Sphinx there. Karn, really good in the mirror matches. He's pretty bad against most of the white weenie decks. I leave him one though, just to hit Mirror Crusader if they're Mirror Crusader decks. Mostly against Pure Steel Paladin decks, because their Mirror Crusaders are insane with swords or flare husks. He needs to be dealt with, and Karn's one of the only ways the deck to deal with him. The other way is Black Sun Zenith, as we see here. The nice thing about it shuffling back is you'll see a lot of them in the matches against Mirror Crusaders, but also sometimes you just draw too many of them. They can clog up your hand very easily. So Black Sun Zenith is pretty important against the white weenie decks, Pure Steel Paladin and Tempered Steel. Just gotta note that. And Ratchet Bomb, as we saw earlier, is another mini type Black Sun Zenith that can actually hit their equipment too, so that's very nice. 4 Darkslick Shores, a smattering of basic lands, 3 Ink Moss, and 3 Phyrexia's Cores. The cores are there to turn your Wellsprings into cards if you don't have Tezzeret to work with them, and the Ink Moss are there to either block opposing Ink Moss, work with Tezzeret in conjunction with Tezzeret, or just act as a -1/-1 blocker counter on your opponents. So the main board's pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, so let's move on to the sideboard. Batterskull is there for the aggressive white matches. It's just a nice way to get that buffer between your opponent and yourself. Despise is there for the mirror match and for pure steel paladin decks, in my opinion. The ability to hit Mirror Crusader or Pure Steel is great against those decks, or Hero Bladehold. And in the mirror, you can hit Tezzeret, Consecrated Sphinx, or Entomber Exarch, which brings us to this guy. This guy's pretty amazing. Hits any non-creature card, so that you can hit land, actually. Hits Planeswalkers, hits a lot of stuff, a lot of counter spells, etc. So that guy's pretty important in the mirror match, or any match against a control deck. Grasp of Darkness is removal 7 through 8. You have 1 through 4, 5 through 6, and 7 through 8 in the board. Just gives you a little bit more options in how you deal with these things. It kills, for instance, Skithiryx no matter what, where this Skithiryx can regenerate. So just an interesting option there. Praetor's Grasp is a tutor from your opponent's deck. Essentially, think of it as a diabolic tutor from your opponent's deck when you're playing the mirror. You often grab Tezzeret to trump them. You can actually look inside their deck, as I'll talk about in the videos later, and see how many Tezzerets they have in their hand. Depending on if it's a normal list, you can assume they have 4 Tezzerets in their deck. If they have 3 Tezzerets in their deck when you look with Praetor's Grasp, you can assume they have 1. Just gives you a little bit of information. If they have 4 Consecrated Sphinx in their deck and you see 2 in their deck, you can assume they have 2 in their hand, just so on and so forth. Steel Sabotage is there for Temper Steel decks. We're taking out some against Pure Steel, and we're putting this one in against. It's also there for the mirror too. Counter the Wellsprings, because the Wellsprings are the card advantage package that runs the mirror. Stoker Battle there for the mirror as well. You need to counter cards like Tezzeret, Consecrated Sphinx, Karn, Liberated, and Volition Reigns, which brings us to the final card in the sideboard. One of the most important cards in the mirror and against any other control matchup, but this is really the only control matchup you should be running into in Block Constructed normally, is Volition Reigns. Volition Reigns is the reason why Karn Liberated is not totally insane. You always have to watch your own Karn. In this daily, I made a misplay where I upped Karn to 14 against my opponent. It was main deck, so he shouldn't have had Volition Reigns, but if he did have a Volition Reigns, he would have just played on the Karn, reset the game, and I would have lost the game, or probably would have lost the game straight up there. You got to be careful, just because this card can turn games right around. Very important to note. Remember, you got to have triple blue for that, so Mycosynth Wellspring accordingly. The deck is fantastic as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Block is pretty poor. Overall, I don't like Block just because there's so many powerful cards, and the rest of the cards are chaff in comparison. You can often just often the games just turn in, whenever you're both good players, the games just turn into who drew more of the good cards and who drew more of the chaff cards. Like for instance, the blue-black mirror main board is absolutely horrible. You have 11 dead cards main board. It's the worst feeling because you're drawing Blacks and Zenith and Dismembers, and they're not worth cards at all. They're worth like 1/10 of a card maybe in those matchups, and it's just miserable. It's really who gets the Tezzeret out first, and if the Tezzeret sticks for a certain amount of time, the game's over. Or if you can match their Tezzeret with your own Tezzeret, does their Wellspring stick around? Can you kill that? Etc. Blah blah blah. The game gets a lot more interesting in the sideboard where you have all these options, but Block can still be pretty luck dependent. So you got to keep that in mind. As I talked about in the daily, there's reasons to run Block though. It certainly can reward skill. There's a lot of bad decks out there. People still playing their own little pet brews that just won't survive these tier 1 decks. And you can still play well when both players draw well. It can come down to skill. So I will see you in the games.